Good morning. Today we're going to talk about weathering and try to answer the question, how does weathering change Earth's surface? If you have your notes on physical and chemical weathering, now's the time to take them out. Feel free to pause this presentation as often as you need to in order to write down all of the important information. Let's go and get started. True or false? The Appalachian Mountains were once as tall as the Himalayas. True. Millions of years of weathering have worn down the Appalachian Mountains to the size and the shape they are today. Let's take a look at these two pictures. Here you have picture A and picture B. Both are a type of rock called granite. Compare the rocks. Which do you think has been exposed on Earth's surface longer? Why do you think this? Take a second, pause the computer, and write your answers down. Okay, let's continue. Probably, I'm guessing most of you said B. If you take a look at B, B has much more rounded shape to the rock. It looks much smoother. This could be a good indicator that B has been exposed on the Earth's surface longer than rock A, which are very pointy. So let's go ahead and get a definition for weathering. Weathering is the breakdown of rock materials by physical and chemical processes. We're going to be talking about two different types of weathering, physical weathering and chemical weathering. Now, some people refer to physical weathering as mechanical weathering. They're the same thing. The words are interchangeable. So if you or your teacher decides to call it mechanical weathering, that's okay. Same thing. So one really important fact of weathering is that weathering occurs really slowly. Think back to that picture of the Appalachian Mountains. To imagine that they were once the size of the Himalayas means that it has taken millions and millions, hundreds of million years to occur. Here's a question for you. True or false? After a rock breaks apart, it will weather even faster. Let's do a little experiment and test this out. You're going to need 2 pieces of candy to get started. Look for a hard candy like an M&M, peppermint, butterscotch, hard piece of candy. Okay, once you find that, unpause and we'll get started. All right, part 1. Without biting the candy, put the candy in your mouth and record how long it lasts before it dissolves. Go ahead and pause it. Great. So you should have your time written down. Now, let's go ahead and take the second candy. That should be the same as what you did the first time. Take that candy, bite it in half. If it's possible, go ahead and bite your half in half, so you have several pieces. Don't bite the candy any farther, but go ahead and put it in your mouth and record how long it lasts before it dissolves completely. Go ahead and pause it. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at our results. So which candy disappeared more quickly? Was it the whole candy? Or was it the candy that was broken up into smaller pieces? Most likely you found that the candy that was broken up into smaller pieces disappeared more quickly. Why do you think this happened? Well, the candy that was broken up into smaller pieces has more of a surface area, right? So it has more surfaces to dissolve. And if you can dissolve more surfaces at the same time, it's going to dissolve more quickly. Let's take this and transfer this to weathering. Do you think that a broken rock weathers faster? Now, we've done this example with a candy. We had our solid candy that was one piece, and then we had our broken candy. So using what you know, try to transfer that to this question. So hopefully you said that yes, broken rocks do weather faster. So we know a rock that's broken is going to have more surface area. There's more surface area to weather. For example, think of a sugar cube. A sugar cube has 6 sides. Now, imagine that I broke that sugar cube in half. Instead of having 6 sides to weather, I now would have 12 sides to weather at the same time. And if I broke that half in half, instead of having 12 sides to weather, I'd have 18 sides to weather. So you get the idea. Broken rocks definitely weather faster because there's more surface area to weather. I know you've heard the words weathering and erosion before. What's the difference? Well, weathering is the breakdown of materials in the Earth's crust into sediment. Weathering is breaking something down, breaking it apart, making it smaller. Erosion is what takes that weathered rock and carries it away. This might happen because of gravity, like a landslide. Could be wind moving that weathered rock. Could be water, like a river. Or ice, maybe like a glacier. But weathering and erosion work together to break down rocks and to carry that rock away into new places. So let's take a look at this definition of physical weathering. Remember, we can also call it mechanical weathering. So physical weathering is when rock gets broken down into smaller pieces, just like you did with that M&M or that piece of peppermint. It was broken down into smaller pieces. It's still the same composition. The minerals, that chemical composition inside that rock does not change. It's still the same type of rock. You just have more pieces, smaller pieces. This can be caused by many things. For example, temperature changes, actions that a plant or an animal might do, water, wind, or gravity. We're going to take a second and we're going to break each of these down and look at them just a little bit deeper. So temperature changes. Changes in temperature contribute to physical weathering. Remember, generally when things get hot, they expand. When things cool, it contracts. This actually will happen with rocks. So as that rock gets hot, it expands and cools and contracts. Over and over, as this happens many, many, many times, that weakens the structure of the rock and it breaks it apart. Think about in the desert. Very hot during the day in the desert. Very cool at night. That sudden temperature change is going to cause those rocks to expand and contract over time. Let's take a look at plants and animals. Plants and animals are also a cause of mechanical weathering. Have you ever seen a plant's roots growing out of not a plant's roots, but a plant growing out of a rock? It happens. And if you're somebody who likes to do a lot of hiking, often you might see a small shrub or a tree growing out of a rock. So what happens is that the plant's roots can grow into the cracks of that rock. Over time, those roots get larger and wedge the rock apart, and they cause it to split and to break in half. Animals can also cause this physical weathering, right? Think about animals that burrow under the ground. They cause rocks to move and to break apart as those animals move around. Humans are another cause of weathering. Think about hiking, right? As you're walking through the woods, you're moving and breaking up rocks and sediment. Water is a powerful force, no matter what type of water we're thinking of, groundwater, running water, waves, glaciers. Water plays a huge role in shaping Earth's landscape. In a river, moving water causes those rocks to become smooth. They get tumbled around in a river. The rocks can cause other rocks as they hit against each other to break and become smaller. Hurricanes can cause shorelines to change their shape. I love this picture of the Grand Canyon. Did you know that scientists believe the Grand Canyon was once a plateau millions of years ago, meaning a nice, smooth, flat piece of land? They think that when the Colorado River formed that it may have flowed over that plateau and over time started to wear away at these small pieces of rock. Over millions and millions of years, that's how the Grand Canyon was formed. Let's talk about another type of water, and this is called ice wedging. Some people might call it frost wedging. So, water has an unusual property. When water freezes, water expands. Have you ever taken a bottle of water and placed it in your freezer to get it cool and then maybe forgot about it? That bottle of water, when you pull it out, is expanded and it's misshapen. If you leave it in there too long, you could have a real mess, right? So when water expands, so what happens is water can enter a crack, and over time, that small crack can split apart. So if you take a look at the pictures here, water enters a crack, water freezes and expands, and over time, that rock breaks apart. Think about cracks in your sidewalk, right? Water seeps into that crack when it rains. Maybe it gets cold and freezes. It expands just a little bit. It melts. Rains again, gets cold and expands over and over and over. Okay, same with potholes. One of the reasons that you see potholes during the spring, right? After a winter, lots of ice wedging. It doesn't happen overnight. Remember, it's repeated. It takes a long period of time. Wind is another example that can cause physical or mechanical weathering. Wind can take small particles like loose soil or rocks or sand. Over time, these particles get carried by the wind and they blast away at rocks and other landforms. Think about sandblasting. I love this picture here. This is a famous formation in Australia. It's called wave rock. So this could be caused by the wind. The sand is carried by the wind and doesn't weather the whole entire rock at the same rate. The middle of this rock was weathered faster than the top of the rock, which is what scientists believe accounted for the curve in the rock. Gravity is another type of physical weathering. Gravity can cause abrasion or scraping as the rocks fall and tumble down the hills. A landslide is an example of physical weathering by gravity. In all of these examples, remember the rock was broken down into smaller rocks. With physical weathering, it keeps the same structure, the same type of rock. It's just broken into smaller parts. The chemical composition does not change with physical or mechanical weathering. Take a look at this picture of the Statue of Liberty. Notice the color. It's kind of a greenish color. Has it always been this color? How could we explain it? Well, if you look at the Statue of Liberty, we know that it used to be a copper color. And this is caused by chemical weathering over a long period of time. That color had changed from copper to green. So let's take a little bit of time and talk about chemical weathering. Chemical weathering is different than mechanical weathering because it's the breakdown of material by a chemical reaction. This actually changes the molecular structure of the rock into a new substance. We can't get the original substance back. It's something completely new. So there's some major types of chemical weathering. It can happen by acidic reactions like acid rain or acid precipitation and something called carbonic acid that we'll talk about later, living organisms, and oxygen in the air. If you take a look at this car, you notice the rust on the car. The rust on the car is an example of chemical weathering. Once a car rusts, you cannot get that steel back. The first type we'll talk about is acid rain, or sometimes called acid precipitation. Acid precipitation is when chemicals are released into the air and they combine with the water and the gases in the atmosphere. Oftentimes, these chemicals are caused by the burning of fossil fuels from your cars or trucks or factories, industry. Now, when acid rain or acid precipitation occurs, it causes rock to break down and it changes that composition. Acid rain is a problem worldwide. It damages buildings and statues and causes them to look old and worn. So, for example, we live close to DC. If you go into DC and you notice the monuments, like the Washington Monument, is not nice and smooth. It's kind of pitted, and this can be from acid rain. Acid rain can also damage plant leaves. It can change the pH in rivers, and that's harmful to fish and other aquatic organisms. Carbonic acid. If you look at the word carbonic, you'll see the word carbon inside of it. Carbonic acid is when carbon dissolves in water, carbon dioxide dissolves in water, and this forms a weak acid. This is how caves are formed. It wears away at the limestone in the ground and forms caves. Carbonic acid can also wear away at buildings and statues made from marble and limestone. Marble and limestone are especially vulnerable to things like carbonic acid and acid rain. Living organisms also can contribute to chemical weathering. Plants, especially mosses and fungi, produce a weak acid, and that weak acid slowly dissolves the rocks. If you're ever out in nature and you take a close look at some rocks with moss on it, you'll notice that that rock underneath and next to it, near it, is kind of weathered. It might be a little pitted. It might be some dips or some divots. So these living organisms that produce this acid ends up producing a small hole in the rock, and plants' roots can grow into that, and that can weather at that rock. This is a picture here of the red rocks in Sedona, Arizona. Reactions with oxygen can also cause chemical weathering. It's called oxidation. So when chemicals react with oxygen, it can cause rust. It can cause rock surfaces to change color. Think about the Statue of Liberty. That's one reason why the Statue of Liberty is greenish now and not that beautiful copper color that it originally once was. Now take a look on your paper, pause it, and you have 8 examples of physical or chemical weathering. Go ahead and decide if they are physical or an example of chemical weathering. And in just a second, we'll go over your answers. Number 1, animals break apart rock as they burrow underground. If you said physical, you were correct. Number 2, acid rain causes damages to trees and forests. If you said chemical, you are correct. Number 3, a bicycle left outside for a long period of time begins to rust. If you said chemical, you're correct. Moss produces an acid that breaks down rocks. If you said chemical weathering, you got it correct. Wind blows sand that chips away at a large rock. This is an example of physical weathering. Caves form from carbonic acid. This is chemical weathering. Rocks in the desert break apart over time because of repeated heating and cooling. This is an example of physical weathering. Large glaciers move across land and wear down Earth's surfaces. This is an example of physical weathering. All right, you have two more things to do. So take a look at this picture here. This is a picture from Joshua Tree National Park. Take a look at this rock. We can assume that at one point, this rock was one solid piece of rock. First of all, do you think this is an example of chemical weathering or physical weathering? If you said physical weathering, you're absolutely right. This rock split apart. It's still the same rock. The chemical composition inside did not change at all. Okay? So think about everything that we've learned today. What is your best guess about how this rock might have become broken? You could take a second and go back and look at the different types of physical weathering. What do you think might have weathered this rock and caused it to split apart? One answer might be temperature. I see some cactus plants there, and that tells me that it could be very hot during the day. Perhaps over a very, very long period of time, the rock could have expanded and contracted and expanded and contracted, and that could have worn down the molecular structure inside and caused it to crack. What did you think? Lastly, take the chart that you have on the very last page of your notes and compare and contrast physical and chemical weathering. On the left side of the Venn diagram, you'll list as many examples of physical weathering as you can. On the right side, chemical weathering. And in the center where the two circles cross, try to come up with as many things as you can that describe how they are similar. All right, thank you. I'm glad that you spent some time with me learning about physical and chemical weathering and how weathering has changed our landscape over time.